would say I definitely look up to Jesus Christ as someone who has achieved their light body, their immortal light body, and how to do that from a place of love. I think of love as freedom. If you don't understand that God is love and God is all giving, how are you ever going to learn how to make fish and loaves appear out of thin air to feed 5,000 people, right? Like you'll never really grasp the generosity of God unless you really practice love and practice receiving God's love. Yeah, that's why I love the practice of radical generosity, like giving to anybody who asks. No questions asked, no judgment of whether they're lazy or whether they deserve it, like just giving. Because if you're truly solar, no one can deplete you.
The container is now open. Alicen Grey is many things. She's a writer, a mystic, a magician, a musician, a teacher. But she comes onto the podcast today to talk about Christianity, a religion you may have heard of. It's interesting. I find that Christianity is actually fairly taboo among spiritual seekers. While we can talk all day about chakras and astrology and ayahuasca ceremonies, talking about the Gospels often brings up a lot of resistance for obvious reasons. But what if these more traditional religious containers, like Christianity, could actually serve to supercharge our spiritual seeking? It's a question that only a few decades ago would have had an obvious answer of yes, and then now it seems really difficult for a lot of people to see Christianity that way. We're going to deep dive into all of this, and we're going to look at Christianity through a lens that you might not have tried on before. Alicen Grey is going to give us a view of Christ's teachings that can really pattern onto a lot of the work we're all doing, and so unlock this tremendous tradition and all of the power that it brings. Before we launch into the interview, I would just like to give a shout out to our patrons. They went to patreon.com/thecontainer and they made a commitment to make small monthly contributions to the show. It helps keep us going. Remember, Jesus on the Sermon on the Mount said, "Give to him who asks from you." And that's kind of what we're doing right now. So, it is kind of the Christian thing to do to become a patron. And now our interview with Alicen Grey. So, Alicen Grey, I'm really excited to share your perspective with our listeners because you come from this Christian mystical perspective or viewpoint framework, and it's a field of discovery that has really opened up for me in the last several months, and it's like, for those of us who grew up in America, particularly who grew up in like rural communities or in the South, like myself, where Christianity was so ubiquitous, it's like these profound mysteries were hiding in plain sight. Yeah. And there's this enormous, like, I've been blind my whole life. Why I didn't see all this stuff was here. Yeah, that's like an opening. I don't know where to go with that, but maybe, start riffing on.
Yeah. Oh, I relate so hard to that. I grew up in a Pentecostal church that I describe as cultic, and I'm careful not to call it a cult for legal reasons, but basically why I think of it as cultic was that there was more of an emphasis on the pastor and appeasing him than on, like, God. And, I went through some things in that church that maybe don't need to be rehashed right now, but it left a real bitter taste in my mouth about Christianity, like most people who grew up in oppressive churches. And I think the main wound I came away with after that experience was this false belief that everyone else had some special connection to God that I couldn't have or wasn't allowed to have, because when I would ask questions in church, I would be punished severely. I mean, like humiliated in front of the church. There were like practically rituals to humiliate me specifically for asking questions. And I guess the curious spirit I have just continued to ask questions despite all of that. But what happened was I shifted to asking questions about everything else, like Buddhism, Hinduism. Like I was willing to explore everything, but I thought Christianity was just like useless. I was like, whatever, I've already experienced that. There's nothing to learn from it. I'm done with it. It's so stupid and primitive and all these things. Imagine my surprise when I came back around to Christianity and realized, just as you expressed, there's so much here. It is just as mystical, just as paranormal, just as psychic friendly as all these other traditions. And when I really let myself give it another chance, I found it so satisfying, and so like satisfying in the sense that um, I all the questions I had did have answers. It's just that my church, I guess, was not willing or able to go to those places with me. And so going to the text directly has opened doors for me, perceptual doorways that, like you said, were just hiding in plain sight. And it's been so rewarding to humble myself and say I was wrong. Christianity isn't stupid. It's just the messengers kind of convolute the message a lot of the time. But the text is still so rich with treasures. If and if you seek, you will find. So, yeah.
That exact moment in, I think, Matthew, when Jesus says that, as reading through the Gospels this year, when I hit that point, seek and you will find, knock and the door will be answered, I just cried. It was so this like homecoming of energy. Yeah. Yeah, something that really resonates with me hearing you talk is like this confusion around what the heart of Christianity is, because of the people I thought were the representatives of Christianity. And like I'm really working now as I'm re-engaging with the church to like not be so prideful and think that they don't know anything, and be like, oh well, I've been doing all of this crazy spiritual work, and like I know the secret to your religion that you've been,
Yeah.
At the same time though, I have this work I have to do when I receive a lot of Christian teaching, where I notice the metaphors or the like framework or like spiritual technology. I was talking to Sai about this the other day, is like high risk. There's like you really have to use a lot of flex your muscles and be really high conscious when you're thinking about things like sin and like forgiveness and the forgiveness of sin and mercy, and like there's just a lot of places where I was misinterpreting it my whole life because the framework was making me think about like guilt or like shame, or it's all about these rules and stuff. I don't know. So there's just like all of these risks but there's this kind of kink vibe that you get into about guilt and shame with it, and like I don't know. I'm like starting to, the bike is starting to get out of control here for me, but
yeah, that makes me curious, Alicen, what your I guess I want to name that, like my best anchor point into this conversation is with my experience going to being raised as an atheist, having family members that were like very shaming of like any mystical or like anything religious or spiritual, was like, oh, you're an idiot, like you don't, like this intellectualism was always put above like what in replacing anything that could be like a felt sense of connection with with humanity or with divine. And so, but then I ended up going into Alcoholics Anonymous. Like, I got sober a number of years ago, and so it was really difficult for me to get sober because in AA, because of the connection with
Yeah.
Christianity, and because I was like, oh, I had adopted these beliefs of my family of origin. And so there was like, over time it was like, okay, well, do I want to like live, and this group of people is here trying to help me, and so like, how important is it that I am right about like what I believe, or can I just kind of make some like, kind of readjust the way that I'm interpreting what they're saying. I just wonder if these things, yeah, like what Jonathan said, and then kind of that experience for me with AA, like how what your path has been like with that, like with leaving and coming back and like revisiting things that in with a completely different perspective, and that kind of thing.
Yeah, well, first of all, congrats on getting sober, and especially confronting whatever beliefs may have been blocking you from like receiving higher help. And that's a huge topic in and of itself. And
Yeah.
there's like three different points I want to talk on at once. So let me see if I can like weave this into something coherent. Starting with what you said, Jonathan, about sin and like, being able to expand your mind enough to comprehend what sin is beyond just like the guilting, shaming premise of like you're just wrong and evil for existing, and like that tripped me up for so long with coming back to Christianity, until I started like, basically what led me back to Christianity was my studies of human psionic and psychic abilities. For whatever reason, I have been obsessed with these things for as long as I can remember. I've had paranormal experiences of my own. I've always been highly psychic. And so I thought that Christianity didn't permit those things, or if it did, it had to be in the name of Jesus, right? Like anyone who wasn't a Christian but had psychic abilities was getting it from demons or something like that. And like it was like power itself was shamed. And so I spent a long time rebelliously studying spiritual power. Like, how do people acquire telekinesis? How do people see into the future? How, like, metaphysically, how does this all work? I want to know the ins and outs, the step-by-step processes and all. And it basically, that led me to a study of cultivating bioelectricity, which goes hand in hand with like immortality and breatharianism, and basically the cultivation of prana, like learning how to be in the pranic state. And then it clicked that was essentially what Jesus was teaching people, like how to be powerful, how to not need food, how to not need money, how to not need anything from the so-called outer world, and how to source things within, like tap into the God within. So now my understanding of sin is a sort of abstract interpretation of, I don't know what verse exactly it is, but the wages of sin is death. Basically, anything that leads to death or energy loss is what sin is. So when you look at what seem like really random, senseless Old Testament laws, like don't mix your fabrics, like don't mix linen and other things, there's actually a science behind that. Like if you blend certain fabrics, the bioelectricity of those fabrics is completely negated, and therefore wearing it like leaches the energy out of your body. So a lot of Old Testament laws are actually about not losing energy, not dying, right? Like continuing to live and live abundantly. So I don't have the same idea of sin, I guess, as most Christians. I don't think it's as simple as like, if you're attracted to the same sex, you're evil and wrong. I think it's like, well, certain sex acts are like, they tend towards energy loss if you're not consciously applying your intention, your will, right? So that's that. And then I want to shift to what you said, Sai, about like this higher power and like humbling yourself. Like, I'm really into this theory of what the Trinity is that I found on Integral Christianity, I think is the name. There's this essay about like how the Trinity of the Father, Son, and Holy Ghost is actually God beyond us, God beside us, and God within us. So God beyond us is the Father, the thing to aspire to, the God that's always going to be more powerful, always going to know more and be more and do more. So yeah, the God to that we just naturally are submitted to, for lack of a better word. And then there's God beside us, which is represented by Jesus Christ, the one who is our brother in Christ, a fellow child of God, like a fellow human being, becoming unified with that higher God, with the Father in heaven, right? And then there's the Holy Spirit, which is the God that we source within. So that's how it's possible to like be God and be autonomous and sovereign, but also not be God, because there's always a bigger infinity. You know what I mean? And so I think it's important when coming back to God, especially after religious trauma, to understand that if if you want to have a good time, basically you have to believe God is love, because if this thing that's bigger than you and can do more than you isn't love, you're in trouble. And like you've set your reality up to reflect this belief that God is evil, and so you're, to practice perceiving God as love makes you more loving. It's like that's what is meant by, I think, a relationship with God. To practice loving God is to practice receiving God's love. And I see now why it was erroneous for me to hate God for so long, because by hating God, I kind of set it up that I felt hated by God. And so there's a lot that goes into it. I don't even know where to go from there. I'll just hand the mic back over to you.
I'm like, I have this desire to just like talk to the listener right now and be like, I also am levitating in my chair, and I'm very excited about what's about to happen.
Tears are pouring out of my eyes.
Really?
There are so many areas I want to double click on. I'm like, I don't even know.
Yeah. So okay, I'm having that experience too. So maybe like we'll line up. Like a lot of us, all three of us, probably have difficult routes back into Christianity. But there are ways that Christianity can be this really powerful connection to this mystical tradition. I mean, the mystical tradition, which is like this human-wide like project of getting our souls back into unity with God. Christianity is like really powerful at doing that, and there are ways to see it so that you can get a taste of that project that maybe you haven't heard before. And like and what I'm really excited about this, like and your shirt even highlights like God's free energy empire. Christ, something that this summer I had these like mind-blowing mystical experiences in cathedrals while we were in Paris. And we had just come out of ceremony during the summer. We did a mushroom ceremony where I learned about the cosmic orgasm and this like potent, generative solar engine at the heart of existence. And then I saw it up on a cross, and I was like, oh, Christ is the embodiment of that.
Yeah.
And it's like, if we can align with this like solar mystery of Christ, then we have access to this infinite generator of power. And that, like, when we look around, I've spent so much of my life afraid of death and afraid of like not having enough and all of this. And it's like, but if I look around, the tendency of the universe is for things to exist. And and Christ seems to say that you can't even kill existence. Like, it will come back. It will be reborn. There's like, anyways, and that is where I'm resonating right now.
I love that. Yes, that's how I feel when I think about these things.
So the key seems to be to embrace Christianity as something new, as something that comes to us after all the ecstatic dance, after all the circling, after all the psychedelics, we can re-embrace Christianity and kind of pattern what we find to our profound spiritual experiences that we've been cultivating through all these other practices. In other words, these aren't in competition. The Gospels don't compete with authentic relating or with Buddhist meditation. Instead, they augment it and kind of shape it into this tradition that gives us access to so much more. And as Alicen's mystical interpretation shows us, there is so much woven into these teachings, things that unlock really profound mysteries about existence. These are far out mysteries that really click into place a lot of parts of the Bible that before might have seemed oddly specific or simply out of place. In this next part of the conversation, Alicen details her own path and how she got to this appreciation for Christianity. And as we work through the fundamental ideas of her spiritual growth, we end up finding even more ways to integrate the Christian framework into the stuff we're doing.
Well, I was going to just invite you into maybe talking more about, because something I was really interested in is the bioelectric, like the energy generation stuff that you brought up a minute ago, and maybe talking more about how you found out about that, what like how that expresses itself in your life, in your practice, and what you do as a practice, and maybe as, I don't know, maybe as a teacher, or so that was what I was curious about.
Oh, I'm so grateful for this question, because this is an opportunity for me to practice shamelessness in telling my story. There is still a little itty bitty part of me that is nervous that people will think I'm crazy or a narcissist when I talk about these things. But the truth of the matter is, when I was 17, I had my first spiritual awakening. I had a spiritual mentor at the time who activated me through a supernatural experience, and I do tell that story on my YouTube channel. It's the YouTube video with no drug DMT trip in the title. So she catalyzed this like profound DMT experience, and we didn't take any drugs. So it was like totally sober psychedelic activation. And for the year that followed that, I stayed in this heightened energetic state where I was literally glowing in photographs. My body started emitting a very sweet smell. I was just telling my friend about this the other day. Like, friends of mine in high school would come up to me and just smell my neck, like not even hello or anything. They're just like, "How do you smell so good?" I'm like, "I don't know." And like, so I was having all these like manifestations of my energy having been activated. My crown chakra, even though I don't really ascribe to the chakra thing anymore, if you for lack of a better descriptor, what people would call the crown chakra was like spinning all the time. I felt the energy just spinning around my head, and this was for a year. It was just constant, and I was having so many supernatural experiences. I did telekinesis for the first time during that year, and so it was because of that strange year of being in that heightened state where I felt the electricity in my body, and other people were noticing it, and like commenting on how I was glowing, or they saw something special about me, or my aura was suddenly so bright. It's because of that I know firsthand that all of these ancient accounts of bioelectricity, the light body, things like that, are real. I have viscerally experienced it. And then some traumatic events happened at the end of that year that I feel I let myself be dragged down by. I don't want to say like I was dragged down by, these people, but I recognize the role of sovereignty in how I chose to sabotage my own spiritual path and recommit myself to victimhood in a way. So once I had like another wave of spiritual awakening, the one that brought me back to Christianity, ever since then I've been really, really determined, or I don't love that word as a word spell, but more intentional and serious about cultivating bioelectricity again. Um, through my own efforts this time, not through that teacher who at the time I was giving so much credit to as like the reason I had awakened, and I was putting her on a pedestal. So that was a mistake. But yeah, these days I am cultivating more bioelectricity, and this time it's through more conscious awareness of food in particular. So I have talked about how I've fasted. I was doing a regular fasting practice every week up until a few months ago. So I'm getting back on track. And just generally, there's so many different ways you can get on the path to cultivating prana. And really, at the basis of it, is not really any special spiritual practice, but just radical self responsibility. You know, understanding that no one can take anything away from you. Nobody can make you feel sad or feel angry or feel traumatized. And I know how mean that might sound to someone who's in the thick of it, but I have been in the thick of it. And I'm saying this as someone who came out of it, that even the most traumatic event doesn't obligate you to act as a victim. And I used to find that idea hurtful and threatening. Like, I used to like weaponize my trauma. Like, you don't know what I've been through. Like, how could you say that I'm sovereign or whatever? But now I'm like, I see the freedom in that message. I see how liberating it is to be told, actually, you're not obligated to feel anything. You can just decide on joy right now. And there doesn't have to be a reason. You don't have to have had a good life. You don't have to have certain privileges. Joy is like something that can happen spontaneously because you are free. And that's been the one of the best realizations I've ever had. It's radically changed my life for the better.
Mm.
Yeah.
The thing that's really coming up for me is how beautiful how beautiful that dynamic is, where you are fully in any moment. It is fully within your power to make a choice, and that choice can be liberation.
Mm-hmm.
That there's always like I to like bend it back into sort of a Christian framework. I think that is kind of this like the infinite mercy of God. What when the Christians talk about like God forgives everything, everything is forgiven. Um, One way I think about that is like in every moment we can choose liberation. It's always there, no matter what you've done, no matter what people have done to you, no matter what is going on outside of you. It's just always there, and it's like within your power to make that. It might be the only choice you can make. You might be really have a very few choices, but that is one choice you can make. Is it's so uh it's like subtle sometimes. It can feel really subtle, but it's this like it changes the entire world all at once.
Well, it's wild that it is subtle because it is all there is.
Mm.
Like in some ways it's all there is. Like the thing that would be preventing the choice is a fiction. Like it's the past or it's the future, it's the it's something that is not here. It isn't like that's just everything you were just saying, Alicen, like really just connects me back to the practice of circling and why, and the profound lessons that practice has taught me around victimhood and like when you're able to really look like I notice, and this is and maybe this is true for others, that my mind, my consciousness is often trying to find the one exception to the rule.
Yeah.
It's like, oh wait, no, this is gonna be actually where I'm a victim. Like,
Yeah.
like this has to be because of how I feel right now. Like, and then I remember, oh yeah, the how I feel right now is like the red herring. It's like the thing that that prevents, or it's like the wall that goes up that prevents me from making those choices of joy or of liberation. It's like this little cage that I get stuck in. But in the practice of circling, like, so many things will come up and they're like, oh, this is, oh, here's another time that, and then you learn over and over and over and over, and with enough reps you realize, like, oh yeah, I always have a choice. And yeah, I really appreciate what you said, that can sound mean. It can be a really hard truth for people, especially ones that are in the thick of it, like you said. But the freedom in really truly understanding that is just, I mean, it's everything.
Yeah.
Yeah. Sorry, go on.
Well, I was just gonna say, so many of these like doorways into deep spiritual truths, as you approach it, it seems impossible. We talk about this a lot on the podcast.
Oh, the paper tigers.
Yeah, you like approach the door and it's like, there's no way it's my responsibility, and it's not, this asshole who did this, or like, this system or whatever. It's like, it's got to be another person's fault, and it just feels impossible. Like, there's no way that behind this door that you could possibly open this door. And then as soon as you do, it's like, oh, this is so much easier and actually much more joyful and loving, and like everything is now possible. But it's every moment in the lead up, it just could not be true. I love, there's something really delightfully frustrating about that.
Yeah, and I love that you named that tendency it seems we all have to try to find the exception, like have the hottest take on like spiritual concepts, like, well, here's this angle that you never considered, because, and even that, though, is evidence of how free we are, because if you can choose the perspective that actually you're not free, you're free to choose your lack of freedom. Like, I love that paradox. It's like, well, if you want to be not free, you're free to choose that. Like, have fun. I'm not going to try to force you to not choose that. I can only lead by example and liberate myself and hopefully show you what's possible for you. That's the way I've come to look at it now. I no longer try to like save the world, but be the one saved by grace and show people what's good, and yeah, so
that makes me curious about how Christianity shapes your practice.
Ooh. I would say I definitely look up to Jesus Christ as the ultimate example in my conscious awareness of someone who has achieved their light body, their immortal light body, and how to do that from a place of love rather than having power for power's sake, which is not necessarily wrong, but I think of love as freedom, so it makes sense to me that Jesus's message emphasized love as much as power, because if you don't understand that God is love and God is all giving, how are you ever going to learn how to make fish and loaves appear out of thin air to feed 5,000 people, right? Like, you'll never really grasp the generosity of God unless you really practice love and practice receiving God's love. So I love that mystery of like how loving God can be, and like how it keeps getting better and better and better, like the more you open up to receive it and become a vehicle for that love in this world. That's why I love the practice of radical generosity, like giving to anybody who asks. No questions asked, no judgment of whether they're lazy or whether they deserve it, like just giving. Because if you're truly solar, no one can deplete you, not even the most parasite. Like, you can give and give and give, and they will never run you dry because there's just more to give. You're infinity. Like, I'm in love with these concepts, and the more I practice radical generosity, like not even bragging, it's become a part of my life. Anytime I see a homeless person or someone comes up to me and asks for cash, I just reach for the first bill that comes out of my wallet and just give it to them, even if I'm broke. Like it, and ever since I started doing that, a lot of my old fears around money and not having enough of it have just disappeared, because now that I know it's possible for someone to just give for no reason, I trust that when I need something, I don't need a reason to receive it. It can just come from any source, and it's been so, that's been liberating. You know, the whole like just give and don't worry about where you're going to get it back from. You already have it, you know, because you are infinity. And that, yeah, that's been also life changing for me. So practicing radical generosity, like the kind that Jesus encouraged in the Gospels, practicing humility and love, which I don't think I'm like the best at. I still consider myself a fairly judgmental person, but I'm working on it. And yeah, and coming to terms with personal power the way that Jesus described. You know, something I emphasize through my up and coming Church of Immortality is that Jesus so often reminded people that they were the ones who performed the miracle. So this is especially clear in how in 3 different healings recorded in the gospel, there was like a healing of a blind man and a healing of a woman with a blood disorder, and I think a lame man. In all of those circumstances, the person came to Jesus for healing, and when they were healed, he said, "It was your faith that healed you." And it seemed like nobody got that message, because then they just start worshiping him, and he's like, "You guys, you did it." And then and then in the miracle where Peter, where they're all on a boat, all his disciples, and then they see Jesus walking towards them on the water, Peter's like, "If it's really you, Jesus, tell me to walk to you on the water." And Jesus is like, "All right, come here." And then Peter starts walking on the water to him. And the moment that he perceives that the water is getting rougher, like there's a storm, suddenly he can't walk on the water anymore, and he starts sinking. And then he's like, "Jesus, save me." And then Jesus reaches out to pick him up out of the water and says to him, "Why did you doubt?" And that question gets to me. It haunts me, like it's under my skin every time I'm like trying to like manifest something or like practice miracle working or healing or what have you, and I start to doubt that it could happen. I ask myself, why am I doubting? What is the point? Like, except to keep myself not powerful, except to withhold this free energy from the world, right? Like, why? And I don't have a good answer. I just don't.
Yes. Oh my, that is such a great reading of, yeah, Peter doubting. He like, it reminds me of this feature that we see come up in circling, where people will make big impacts on others in the circle, not because they're like, "I don't care about the impact I make," but because they're like, the way they see themselves is, "I could never make a big impact. I'm not important enough." What that ends up doing, it's like it looks like humility, but actually it's conceding all responsibility.
Yes.
And there's this way
Yes.
that when we truly have faith, when we truly hold on to this belief that like I can align myself with like matter and spirit, and I can tap into this like generative core of existence, we have so much responsibility then, and like we can make such powerful positive impact, and that's like scary.
That is
like
a lot to manage.
yeah, especially if like I've lived so much of my life in this like worried about rent and stuff, not how am I gonna wield the cosmic orgasm rate in the universe. That's crazy.
Yeah. Oh, see, what you're describing is I am consciousness. Like, no caveats, no qualifiers, no exceptions, just I am. Of course you can have impact on a bunch of people. You are. Like, and yeah, just being in the present and letting go of this story of like, my name is so and so. I've been working as a such and such for so and so. This is how much money I make. This is who my friends are. Like, everything that limits us is just a story that we tell. And when we're able to not be a story, but just be, like I am, that's when all this power surges forward. And that's something I think is revealed in the fact that, like, post Jesus's life, now in like retrospect, looking at who he is on the world scale, you can see how Jesus had to be willing to be perceived as anything and everything to everyone, or else he couldn't do the work he was doing. Like, if he cared too much about being liked or being understood, so much of his miracles would not have occurred. So many, I mean. I think it's so interesting when you step back and look at like the impact Jesus had on the world. Some people think he's the literal savior of humanity and that he's God. Some people think that Jesus was a black magician. I've seen Satanists say that. Some people think that Jesus was just a dude. Some people think he didn't exist. Some people think he was a metaphor for the sun, and it goes on and on and on. And it's like his I amness created this space of like a universal identity where he is everything, like all the bad things, all the good things, depending on how you choose to perceive him. And it is through that, like, almost like lack of identity, that his power came through. He was so humble. He was able to like be this person who could like command huge crowds and also be the person washing his disciples' feet. Like, just egolessness in practice. It's so inspiring to watch, but I've got to say a little scary, because I think of that, I'm like, if I had to be a servant in order to have like power, then could I come to terms with that? Could I make peace with that? Like, would I be okay washing people's feet and maybe being disrespected, maybe being crucified, you know? Like, I don't know. I don't know that I'm there yet, but I know I see the sense in that, through like what he was teaching. I see why it's like necessary to become identityless, in pursuit of union with God. Yeah.
What really comes up for me is this, you know, when you were saying that question haunts you, the why did you doubt? What haunts me is the like, and I talk to Jonathan about this a lot, is like, what is unconscious that I'm not able to see, that I'm not tracking, that could be like the answer to that why? Like, but then I think of that there's, in a way, asking why is sort of leading you down this path of not getting closer to it. Like, by asking why, that's not the question. Like, that question is just going to lead you into this inquiry that's like taking place in the intellect, and like is probably a lie. The answer is probably a lie anyway. And which leads me back to like what you said about the I am consciousness. Like if that is where you're rooted, then the why is really kind of, it doesn't exist. Like the why did you doubt? Yeah, I don't know.
Oh yeah. Oh, I love that framing of it, because like, one of the things I teach is like how to ask a question and like the metaphysical function of questions. And I have learned through my question practice that if you ask a loaded question, you'll get a loaded answer. So yeah,
Yes.
you're totally right. Like, asking why did you doubt assumes that there's a reason to doubt. So that's
Right.
excellent. Yeah. So maybe the answer to that question is like, I don't doubt. Like,
Yeah.
there is no doubt. And just start walking on the water again.
Exactly. Ooh, that, I feel so curious about the questioning practice. We've done a lot of work around questions, and we've developed some games to play with people with questions. I'm very interested in the way that questions influence everything. And especially what you just said about asking loaded questions, and yeah, the like what has you asking that, you know, like what has you asking that question? Where's the agenda? What is the expectation? What is the on the other side of that communication like arc is really interesting to me.
Yeah. Are those rhetorical questions, or is there space for an answer here?
No, please answer.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. I came to see the importance of questions through, you know, coming out of that hostile church environment that didn't allow questions and like punished them and humiliated people who would ask them. I got the sense from those experiences that like, oh, questions must be kind of important if people are so scared of them. Like, and then me being the rebel I am, I'm like, ooh, I like to scare people. Let me start asking some questions. And so, but that like, you know, it started as a rebellion and then it became like a really practical practice, to be redundant, of like how much can a question reveal? I want to know. And I want to see what's the most taboo question I could be asking. What's the most forbidden? What's the most unasked question? And like, it just, you can go so far with it. And so questions have been a practice of unlimiting myself and opening new intellectual doorways, and allowing in answers that I don't think I might have been open to before the question. So questions can be really useful, and they're most useful when you're coming from a place of, it's like threefold. It's like giving people the benefit of the doubt. So not asking questions that assume the worst about a person or assume that they know less than you, like assuming everyone can be your teacher, right? It's so it's like somewhat humbling to get into the habit of asking questions. There's understanding that you have the right and the power to ask questions. I think a lot of people don't even know that they're allowed to, as we saw with like the past 4 years in every dimension of public life, like with the pandemic and like the presidency. There's so many taboo questions, right, that like you get excommunicated or like canceled for asking. And so there's that dimension of it. And then there's just like having fun with the question, like seeking knowledge doesn't necessarily have to be scary or serious. You can just be curious and playful about it. And that, just coming at it with that attitude of like assuming it's going to be a fun discovery process, in and of itself can open certain, create space for certain answers that if you're being super serious about it, you maybe wouldn't have been open to. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I love that.
Also, just, I feel like acknowledging that without my glasses on, I can't see the details of your facial expressions. So I'm just trusting that I'm trusting that there are smiles on your face.
Huge smile. I feel an enormous amount of delight with this conversation.
Oh, good. Me too. Yeah. I love, yeah, I love exploring ideas in general. So I would love to hear more of where you two are at with some of the things we've touched on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I notice I'm like really stuck on this thing you mentioned. I've seen this on your website, I think, that you want to start a church.
Yeah.
And when I hear that, I'm like really, something I really connect with is here in our community in Charlottesville that we've been building in different ways for like a year or a little bit more than that, and I guess quite a bit more than that now, but trying to build an intentional community of practice. And then the more I've been going to mass, it's like, why not have it all? Why, like, this is what we want as a church. This is like at home in this way that I think there's almost, for many years, there was shame or there was some sense that, like, of course we couldn't ask for that much or something, which is so the opposite of, like, the revelation that you're really moving from, this, like, free energy sense, you know, where you can ask for everything. And it, yeah, I realized with something like circling, so much of it has been presented in a secular way, which I honor because 2 years ago I wouldn't have done it if it was not secular. If it, there's a lot of people who discover it because it doesn't cut anyone out.
Mm-hmm.
But then wanting to reunite it with my spiritual and like magical and occult practices, and wanting to have a community that's all of those things. It's this full spectrum. And realizing that having rituals and community around that is so, it's just like, if I feel almost a fear to even pretend to think that could happen.
Oh.
And then when I hear you like going for it, it really it's exciting. It's exciting to think of a project that would have that kind of vaulting ambition.
Oh, I'm so honored that you perceive me as going for it, because I've been stalling for like months on this, and I started with a lot of gusto, because the way the idea for the church happened was that I was praying before bed, and I'm really into this practice of like seeding a dream, meaning like you ask a question before you go to sleep, and then whatever your subconscious puts forward in your dream is like, you take it as the answer and see what happens. So I asked God, like, what do you want me to do? What do you want me to do in this life? I don't even mean career-wise, just like, what is my calling? Like, what is it? And then I had a dream that night where I was giving a sermon at a very special wooden podium that was about immortality, and like how Jesus was preaching immortality. And I woke up, and it wasn't just that was the dream. It was that I felt, while I was dreaming, I felt like a hand reach from the waking world through the layers of reality into my dream and pull me out of the dream into wakefulness and say, pay attention. And then I woke up, and it took me a few seconds to process, and I was like, oh, was that the answer to my question? And like, I just was so motivated, and I started writing all this content that I haven't actually even put out yet, but it's like sitting on my computer, like all these like lectures or sermons for the Church of Immortality. And the reason I've been stalling is because I've been really investigating this limiting belief that I have that no one would be interested, or that this is a fringe topic. Like, oh, the world isn't ready, or like, I'm not good enough to teach immortality because I can't prove yet that I'm genuinely onto anything because I'm young. Like, we'll know if we know what I'm talking about when I'm 80. Like, do I still look young and vibrant? Am I still living and thriving, or am I just another person who thinks that they figured it all out and like failed to actually like embody their gnosis? So I have all this imposter syndrome and all these things, and so I've been holding back, I'm not gonna lie. But it's funny because before we started talking, I was telling you I'm in this practice of like, everyone is you and this is a dream. So the fact that you just named that out loud, I'm taking to be like my own limit expressing itself to me and asking to be integrated. So I'm really grateful that you expressed that. And I can see how I have that limit within myself too. And what I take comfort in is where Jesus in the gospel said, where two or more are gathered in my name, there I am. Like, that's church. It doesn't have to be a physical place. It's anywhere where two people get together, two or more, to like focus their consciousness on the same goal, same aspiration. And if we're sitting here talking about mysticism, which is direct connection with God, with no middleman, no intercessor, just you and God directly, we're having church right now. Like, this is radical, and to me it speaks of like a shift that the world is moving towards. No more like false authorities, no more surrendering our power to controllers, and like realizing we have the right and the privilege of connecting with God no matter who we are. So yeah, I'm really grateful you said that out loud.
Church. The word has a wonderful weight to it, doesn't it? It's expansive. It has a fullness that other words simply don't have. Spiritual meetup, meditation circle, practice group. These are beautiful phrases, especially because they're connected to these communities that offer really powerful experiences. But none of them, and I mean none of them, are a church. A church is something that you can give everything over to. It's big enough to hold the entire community, the entire civilization. It's a context, a really, really big context. And I think, especially with conversations like the one we're having with Alicen Grey, it's one I want more and more of my practice to happen inside of. In this last part of our conversation, we work through really what that would mean to build a church, what kind of energy and audacity that would take. And in a delightful turn, art comes up as territory where we can discuss and understand the battleground of the human condition. There's something so exciting about spiritual projects that get interwoven with dream country and with and like with your own kind of mystical and developing relationship with a personal God. It's like so yeah, it's so tantalizing, to be here in relation to you talking about that. It's like, man, I can't wait to go to Asheville and hear you preach immortality.
Oh yeah. It's funny. Maybe it will be Asheville. I'm not currently there anymore. I did make the choice to leave after Helene.
Yeah.
And I mean, I'll be honest. I did already want to leave Asheville before the hurricane, so that was kind of like my out, like my excuse to just leave. But I had been wanting to, but I see it taking place in the desert, like in Tucson or something. I don't know why. I've been feeling that call to Tucson for so long, but wherever I end up, I'll be excited to like, trade excitement in person. Like that sounds like fun.
Wow.
Also, I love your use of the word or the phrase dream country. That lit something up in me. Like, ooh, like the land of dreams, the country of dreams, a nation of dreams. Like that. My mind is going and going with that. I love it.
Yeah, it there's like this framework growing in my mind around this with as I've been entering into Catholicism more and more formally. And I've been feeling how apologies to Sai, because I've given this is like the third round of this rant. I'm like, I've got locked and ready to go.
Your rant is welcome here. I've never heard it, so
I like hearing the evolution, so I'm very much that. Yeah.
There's this way that I've noticed. I used to think what would prevent me from entering the church is that I do all of these things that are like far from doctrinally allowed, like reading tarot and doing magic and I don't know, there's like a lot, and doing like psychedelic ceremonies and all these different things are like feel far afield. But then what I've noticed is that as I've moved into the Catholic Church, that actually that tradition is holding a lot of things for me and keeping this border, and that helps contain pressure. And it was this work that I never realized I was having to do for myself for so long. And the way I think of it now is that actually by having the tradition hold so much for me, I'm actually able to go deeper into the mystical. I'm actually able to like line up. It's like to see into God from an incarnate position. It's like you have to line up all of these windows to get the light to shine through all of these walls. And like there are many, around the world, there are many different ways to do that, and this is one of them. But now that I have it lit up, it's like now the sun comes through and I have that, and I have like I have all that figured out now, and I don't have to attend to it. So now in dream country, I get to go even more wild because I have all this more power and I have a tradition holding me. The way I think of it is the Hierophant protecting the High Priestess. There's like, yeah, the solar is covered, and so then I get to walk past the High Priestess's curtain into the, the lunar landscape where anything is possible. And um yeah, so it's like, whoa, I'm actually able to go further now than I think I ever was able to before.
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, and when you say go further, you mean through the practices that you once thought were like not allowed, like divination and psychedelics and things like that?
Yeah, totally. It's like my occult practices are actually supercharged now that I have mass, and I get to, like, and like I have a structure that I can just go to and rely on, and like, oh, that's all set. Like, something that tired me out about this sort of, I would say a lot of occultists now fall into some kind of chaos magic,
Yeah.
whether they know it or not. It's like,
Yeah,
yeah, it's
that's
like
a
they're just
great
kind of,
observation.
yeah, they're like making it up as they go along, or they're putting it together buffet style. And deep, deep bow to my brothers and sisters doing it that way. I did that for many years, but I spent so much time like, what is the incense to burn to talk to Thoth Hermes, or what, like
Mm.
all of those, like trying to figure it out and recreate rituals and stuff. And then now I can just figure out the saint, and then I just pray to the saint, and it's like,
Mm.
I have the technology is all there, and I can just start using the technology rather than. And that is something that, like, exoteric religion provides me that I never appreciated before. It gives me structure. And so that's what, and I really think that, like, building exoteric religion that is even more able to be plugged into esoteric religion, like a Church of Immortality, for instance. It's like that's like advancing the technology of religion even further to the. Yeah, I'm just so excited for the future of the human race. Just
Oh,
talking about it.
yeah. I have an astrologer friend who credits the resurgence of interest in religion as an institution to Saturn passing through Pisces right now. And so we've been speculating on what Saturn in Aries would look like, because, then we're leaving the like Christian Vesica Pisces domain of Pisces and moving into Aries, which is this newborn kicking and screaming, like wanting to experience everything. And so, like, what is Saturn? Because Saturn's debilitated in Aries, I think. And yeah, so it's like, what is that gonna look like? But I so deeply resonate with your newfound appreciation for the structure that religion offers, because um I personally used to fear it and resent it, because I feel like I'm a rebel at heart, and anytime someone tries to tell me this is how it's done, my instinct, like you were saying before, Sai, is to be like, well, actually no, this is like, I want to consider this perspective instead. And it's like I see that mindset as necessary on the healing journey of like knowing that you can be the one standing alone and exploring an idea all by yourself, and you're allowed to do that. That's important to exercise that muscle. But there does come a time to appreciate why institutions are enduring, like why the church has lasted so long. I don't think it's just because of missionaries, and the Inquisition. I don't think it's just because religion is the opiate of the masses. I think those are overly simplistic and dismissive explanations of why religion is so long standing. I think there is something at the heart of it, is evidenced by cathedrals, which you mentioned earlier, and I meant to comment on. Um, there is some inextinguishable, is that a word? Inextinguishable flame at the heart of religion that the institution is like a protective case around. And
Yes.
yeah. And like if you can get through that hard barrier of like religion to the soft heart of mysticism and see that there was something really pure in the center of it, like you'll understand why religion endures. It's like always forever inviting us closer and closer and closer to the inner sanctum. the church within, so to speak. So to quickly make a note on cathedrals, since I just brought it up again, I think it's not for nothing that, like, in our really bleak, drab world of, like, blockish architecture, cathedrals are just these, like, buildings that won't die. Like, they are just this, like, timeless portal into this past where humans were, like, really energetically sensitive. We um we were so interested in our own higher potential that was reflected in the kinds of buildings we built, that, like, amplified and optimized sound healing, light healing. There's all these qualities that cathedrals have that modern buildings don't really take into account, and that says something, I think, about our collective state of consciousness, that we stopped caring about this for some reason. I have a whole article on that has it's one of my most popular articles on Substack. We used to build cathedrals. What happened to us? And it's like, whenever people I get so many comments on that article as, like, snapping people awake, like, yeah, you're right, like, and I think we all sense it deep down, like, we know we have higher potential and we want to realize it. We just, I think, have been misguided about or maybe not misguided, because that implies an agenda, but, like, maybe we've chosen not to know for a time in our evolution, and I don't know exactly why, but I think a lot of people are choosing to know again lately, and that's really encouraging. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that has me thinking about art and sculpture and this kind of mind-blowing experience we had at the Louvre right after we had been at a 6-day festival for circling and transformational connection. So we'd been in this intensive process for 6 days with these, with this incredible group of people in the Netherlands. And then we head over to Paris and go to the Louvre and see these paintings. And as I'm looking at this David painting. What was it called?
Rape of the Sabine Women.
The Rape of the Sabine Women. And there's just this scene that is humanity. It's like people being human beings together. There's babies and there's mothers and there's men and there's, like, the divine feminine and the divine masculine, and they're all in these, like, attitudes and these poses. And it's just captured so beautifully, like, this is what humans are. And it looked exactly like the people at the festival looked in the room doing the process of transformational connection.
Ooh.
And I was like, this is what artists could see before. And maybe they can still, like, maybe some can still, but we used to build cathedrals. It's like, this was the connection we had to one another, that we could see each other this way and create art out of it. And looking at, like, the Psyche and Cupid, like, just the capturing of that humanness, the divinity of the humanness, like, and I have this story that it's because of the level of presence that we were capable of before there were, smartphones and, all of that kind of stuff, like, that we were actually able to be in connection in like, you spoke to the energy of, just that, like, just not having these distractions, like, the way that people could connect was so much more profound. And then that was exemplified in the buildings, in the art, in the sculpture, like,
Yeah. Oh, I love everything you just shared, and it gave me, like, secondhand inspiration to hear you describe it. I love that you made the connection to smartphones and such, because, like you were asking earlier about, like, the cultivation of bioelectricity, it's so interrelated to attention span. Like, how long you can willfully direct and focus your consciousness is directly tied to how much energy you have. Or how purposeful you are with your energy. So it's no surprise that, like, when a culture is collectively interested in realizing their higher potential and cultivating more prana, that's reflected in every aspect of our culture, the buildings, the cars, the roads, everything. And when we are not interested and we're not able to hold our consciousness on an end goal, on an aspiration of or the desire to realize our higher potential, then everything starts to fall apart and look bleak, and it's like we are being shown the state of our consciousness through the external mirror of the world. And so and I like to believe, or I choose to focus on, so I don't lose my sanity, I choose to focus on the fact that there are still artists who have that grand talent. However, for whatever reason, this is worth doing our collective shadow work on, we have chosen to put modern art on display in like museums and stuff, and it's like money laundering canvases with just like paint splatters on them, and like, not that that can't be art or can't be a genuine expression, but like there's so much more to express and so much more skill with which it could be expressed. And like, why have we collectively voted with our consciousness to exalt like the easiest, lowest common denominator forms of art, you know? And it's tricky because I never want to insult any artist's genuine expression. But I do wonder why we stop at expressing ourselves through like scribbles when we could be painting like Sistine Chapel level tapestries, you know, or murals, you know what I mean?
Oh, what do you have to say about that, Jonathan? I have
A
this
lot
story.
to say.
Jonathan, like you and Jonathan are so incredibly aligned on this exact point. It's like, whoa. Yeah.
Yeah, the first thing I think about is Rothko. So when I was a much younger man, I fell in love with Rothko, who if you're watching this and you're not familiar, he's the guy who basically painted big squares of color.
Mm-hmm.
That's like how people think of it. But if you like look at his early work, it's like he was painting mythological scenes, and then he started organizing them in rectangles, where like everyone's heads would be in this rectangle up above and their bodies in this like square down below. And you see like, oh, his color filled paintings are starting to emerge, but they emerged through mythology.
I never knew this.
Yeah, and Rothko, of course, he like one of his great works that I think he actually never got to see completed is there's a cathedral, there's like a church or a chapel, Rothko's chapel
In Texas, right?
Yeah, that has all of his, it has like paintings that a series of them he did. And to me, like I had this psychedelic experience in the St. Louis Art Museum in front of a Rothko. I got it. I was like standing in front of it, seeing the layers of color, and it like I like entered into orange as a force in the universe, and I was like surfing in orange, and then I like slowly came back. It was really like one of the most powerful art experiences I've ever had. And then like you can go to almost any like Holiday Inn now, and there's these like commercial productions that are like they look like Rothko paintings,
Yeah.
you know? They just are like, and there's this way that I think there was something really spiritually profound that someone like Rothko was doing, or Barnett Newman. But the thing is, it's not hard to make something that looks like it.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're in front of the canvas, you realize this was a magical act. This thing is fucking vibrating with with like the hardcore, like, you know, thalamic sex magic that Rothko put into this thing. It's undeniable when you're in front of the object. It's this cultic object, this fetish item that's like holds power, that's overwhelming. But like this, there is this prostitution of that because it's replicatable. And I think that like industrial capitalism does this thing where it prostitutes out what's replicatable. And you can, because you can get the price really low. And that becomes this obsession of like anyone can have abstract art on their walls. And I mean, now with your cell phone and with AI, it's like
images have been prostituted to the point where it's, yeah, I'm starting to have like this anxiety coming up about how much more I could talk about this, and like,
Oh, same. I have big thoughts about AI. So I was already with
yeah,
you on this current of like, well,
yeah,
yeah, let's talk about like the universality in the simple, right? Like and
mm.
the grand design of what looks mediocre or mundane. And then you mentioned AI, and now I'm like, oh God, here's another podcast episode like I'm about to launch into. I guess I can condense it this way because I see that we are near time. I I've been trying to release judgments about AI and instead like integrate it as a part of myself I'd rather reject and rather disown, because I perceive AI as the part of ourselves that wants the benefits of consciousness and sentience and the joy of that without the effort of evolution. So I resent it as this easy way out of like the great work and the path of like alchemizing the unconscious into consciousness. I resent AI for trying to be a shortcut to creation. But I guess I can't really hate it if it is just reflecting back whatever part of me is still trying to take shortcuts to enlightenment, whatever that may mean. And it's like, like if Jesus can raise the dead, then AI can be redeemed. And like, I hate to say that. But I guess that's like the work I have to do as an artist who used to tell myself the story that I lost my old editing job to AI. Like now I hate AI. But like, maybe that was a gift because maybe editing wasn't really my calling, or maybe it's calling me to be even better than what AI can do, or like I don't know, but there is a gift in there. I know it. I just don't know what it is yet, but we'll figure it out.
There's something that is going to stick with me after this conversation, and for I know it for like days and weeks and maybe forever. That I don't even know. It's like a gift I am receiving from you, Alicen, that is this amazing practice that you do, and I'm not sure, you probably are aware you do it, of seeing the external as this reflection. You even mentioned it at the beginning, but that like you live by that. You've done it like 4 times in this conversation, and now I'm like, oh my gosh, what if I like I'm going to do this now. This is such an easy thing. Easy. It's just
Accessible.
it's like so replicatable. It's a thing that I think all of our listeners that I know I am going to like, this is going to have a lasting impact on my life. The seeing things that like it's this idea of that I've been playing with, that the opposite of love is judgment, right? And so if I'm judging something, it's that I'm making it separate from me. It is not like me. And so seeing the way that you're describing, like, oh, this thing kind of irks me. How is it a mirror of me? Like that is, it is like the practice of like where I've noticed, okay, judgment is, well, what do I do now that I see that I'm judging? It's like the other side of that practice. It's like the practice of how is it like me? How is it a mirror of me? Like, how is this cat Indy really expressing this part of myself that I haven't fully owned?
Yes. Oh, I'm so glad to hear that, and yeah, it took a while for me to get to this place of like life really is a dream and I'm not scared of that anymore. Like if it is true that I am alone in the universe and it's just me and everything else is just a faceted reflection of me, then gotta make the best of it. You know what I mean? Like if, instead of feeling like, oh no, I'm alone and everything's my fault, it could be like, ooh, like I want to find out more about like, the different corners and hidden parts of my consciousness. Like, who are you? And like, how can we understand each other? And yeah, I think I know, did you mean like it's accessible? Like, cause I wouldn't say it's like easy, or it can be if you like radically accept it, which is not necessarily easy to do in the first place. But yeah, I think everyone can play with this idea that we're all each other.
Right.
And taking each other as part of ourselves, and that is love at the end of the day. I think that's part of the mystery of God's love, is that we are all invited to unify with God, no matter how badly we've sinned or like strayed from God, so to speak, right? Like we're still invited to the reunification. And but like that, it's also our responsibility to reunify with all the things we've rejected, including God. So yeah, to round it all back to Christian mysticism.
Yeah, and I did mean accessible. I think I love these ways that, like, I love tools that I can implement that are just that are signaled, like there's a signal to use the tool in ways that I engage with the world on a regular basis. Like, oh, when I hear, like, a practice Jonathan and I have where when we hear ourselves saying, oh, that made me, like, that's a signal. Oh, okay, how can I reframe that? It made me. Okay, let's reframe it. And so it's like a little tag. And so and then you get lots and lots of reps in. And I just notice you getting these reps in with that practice of like, oh, that's irking me, or that is like, and that is the signal to then how is this me? Yeah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
I like that framing of it as reps. Like I'm getting my exercise in by doing this. That's my workout for the day. I don't need to do my steps. Yeah.
Well,
oh, sorry. I was just gonna say one more thing. This has been such a medicinal conversation. I love hearing both of your perspectives, and I appreciate the way that not only you perceive and approach things with this genuine open-heartedness and curiosity, but like also how you articulate things. It's like I love words, and so it's especially fun when someone like is good at words. You know what I mean?
Yes. Agreed.
Yeah. Well, now that we're like coming to the close of our time, I want to make sure that before we go, we carve out like what are ways listeners can get more of your thinking and your art.
Oh, yeah. So I can't believe I didn't mention this, but I'm a musician, and I make music under the moniker When Humans Had Wings. So that's like a little hearkening back to, you know, the days where we built cathedrals and the days where we had telekinesis. And, you know, I say in the past, like, as a tongue-in-cheek thing, there is no past, there's only now. So I love reminding people of our human potential through my music. So When Humans Had Wings, that's on every streaming platform. Then there's just my website, alicen-grey.com, and that's Grey with an E. And through there, people can do coaching sessions with me. I also have a few courses. One of them is about how life is a dream. So that's something I love to share my perspective about with people. One of them is a course about how to ask questions. So if that part of the conversation interested anybody. And my main course is Symbol Speak, which is about how to interpret your life like a dream or like a living work of art in order to understand more about what's going on in your subconscious. So it's like a sort of great work path of unifying the unconscious with the conscious mind through symbols in your everyday life. So I'm really proud of that course, and it's been beneficial in my own life. Yeah, and I guess now I'm inspired to revive the Church of Immortality. So I've got a little email list sign up on my website under the tab Church of Immortality, so you guys can go find that. And I think that covers it. So thank you for having me on. This was such an illuminating and delightful conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, thank you for joining us. This was wonderful.
Yeah, ditto.
The container is now closed. You can really get an appreciation for Alicen Grey's incredible mastery of symbolic thinking just by listening to her interpretation of the Gospels. And I think it's an amazing endorsement of the work she does at alicen-grey.com. If you go there, you can catch her incredible writing. You can also hire her as a life coach and as a teacher. For me, these kinds of conversations are becoming more and more important because I really yearn for that grounding in a religious tradition. You know, today we are lucky. We have so many spiritual modalities available to us, and just by going online, we can get involved in these communities. And even in like small towns now, there's probably an ecstatic dance group, or, you know, circling maybe. At the very least, there's probably like a meditation circle that gathers once a week. But I think what would supercharge all of this is if it was held in a tradition, one that we were able to hand down to the next generation, and one that we get as our inheritance. You know, I'm not talking about some kind of traditionalist return narrative where things used to be perfect and then decadence broke everything down. Instead, I think that to really honor these journeys that we're going on, we need a greater context. We need this sort of moral fabric that we move through and can work off of, rather than having to, on our own, build lattice work of philosophy to make sense of any information that comes to us. I'm really excited to hear what you guys think about this episode, and we're really, really grateful that Alicen Grey came on to open it up for us. With that, we have a nice way of closing. Keep it namaste.